Billboard named it the greatest duet of all time. It spent 9 weeks at #1. It became Diana Ross's biggest hit and Lionel Richie's best-charting single. Lionel Richie called the recording session a disaster. He was right about everything except that. The story of Endless Love begins not in a recording studio, but in a meeting between a songwriter and a film director, and it begins with a request that was considerably simpler than what it eventually became. Franco Zeffirelli was an Italian director of considerable reputation, the man who had given the world his 1968 film Romeo and Juliet, whose Henry Mancini-scored love theme had itself become a #1 hit, and who was now preparing an adaptation of Scott Spencer's novel about desperate teenage romance and the particular kind of obsession that destroys everything it touches. He needed music for his film. He wanted something romantic, something that would carry the emotional weight of what he was putting on screen, something in the tradition of the great film love themes that had outlasted the films that produced them. He called Lionel Richie. In 1981, if you wanted a grand and gooey love ballad with the specific quality of feeling both enormous and intimate simultaneously, Lionel Richie was the person you called. He had written 3 Times a Lady and Still and Easy and the Commodore's catalog of ballads that had redefined what an R&B group could do with a slow song. He had written Lady for Kenny Rogers, which had gone to #1 and crossed every boundary that popular music had constructed between country and pop and R&B. He understood, better than almost anyone working in commercial music at that moment, how to build a song that felt like a declaration, that said something as large as love requires to be said, without the largeness becoming grandiosity. He agreed to write an instrumental theme. This was the first version of what Endless Love was going to be, a piece of music without words, a melody that would run beneath the images and tell the audience what to feel without telling them in language. Lionel fashioned something from a piece of music he had originally written for the Commodores, but never recorded, something that had the sweeping romantic quality that Zeffirelli was looking for, that moved in the direction of love and declaration and the particular emotional register of people who mean what they are about to say with everything they have. Then Zeffirelli changed his mind. He wanted lyrics. This was the second version. Lionel wrote the lyrics, the disarmingly simple, deliberately unguarded words that would eventually be heard by hundreds of millions of people. My love, there's only you in my life, the only thing that's bright. The lyrics were not complicated. They were not clever in the way that award season songs try to be clever. They were simply direct, the specific kind of directness that Lionel had been cultivating since he first understood that the shortest distance between a songwriter and a listener is a sentence that means exactly what it says and nothing else. Then the record company changed the plan. The song, they decided, should be a duet, and Diana Ross should sing it. This was the third version of what Endless Love was going to be, and it was the version that Lionel had not prepared for. He had never written a duet. He had written songs for himself and songs for other people, but a duet is a specific thing, a conversation between two voices, a musical negotiation between two presences, a form that requires something different from either participant than a solo performance requires. He was not certain he had done it. He was not certain the song, as it existed, was structured to be shared between two people. He expressed his uncertainty. The record company expressed their certainty. Diana Ross was going to sing Endless Love.
Diana Ross was, in 1981, one of the most significant musical figures in the history of American popular music. She had fronted the Supremes through their run of 12 #1 singles in the 1960s, a streak of commercial success so extraordinary that it had defined what Motown was and what pop music could do. She had launched a solo career that had produced hit after hit through the 1970s and had established her, independently of the group that had made her famous, as one of the most recognizable voices and presences in the world. She had won a Grammy. She had been nominated for an Oscar. She had performed for presidents and royalty and the kind of audiences that only the truly famous ever stand in front of. She was also, by her own description and by the description of everyone who had worked with her, a perfectionist. She liked to be on time. She liked things to be prepared. She liked the process of recording to proceed with the specific, organized efficiency of someone who has been doing this long enough to understand that chaos is not a creative condition, but a waste of time. She had worked with Berry Gordy and the Motown machine and the particular discipline that machine had instilled in everyone it produced. She arrived at recording sessions ready, and she expected the people she was working with to be ready. Lionel Richie was not always on time. This was not a secret. It was simply a fact about how he worked, a function of the particular creative process that had produced some of the most successful popular music of the previous decade, a process that was more organic and less structured than the Motown machine had been, that made room for inspiration at the expense of schedule, that sometimes arrived at the recording session still working out what the session needed to produce. He was not careless, he was not unprofessional, he simply operated on a different relationship with time than Diana Ross did, and the difference was significant enough that she mentioned it explicitly in her autobiography as one of the difficulties of their working relationship. None of this had been fully reckoned with when the decision was made that they would record together. The decision had been made at the level of the record company and the film's producers, in the way that decisions are made at that level, with attention to the commercial logic and less attention to the human logistics. Diana Ross and Lionel Richie were both extraordinary talents. They were both Motown artists, at least historically. They had the kind of name recognition that guaranteed the song would be heard. The record company was confident. The film's producers were confident. The studio was booked. The challenge was that Diana's schedule and Lionel's schedule existed in the particular mutual incompatibility of two people who are both extremely busy and whose obligations are organized around different priorities and different geographies. Lionel was in Los Angeles, working on material for the Commodores and producing Kenny Rogers' albums simultaneously. Diana was on tour, moving between venues on the kind of schedule that leaves no room for detours or additional commitments. Finding a time and a place where both of them could be in the same room was not a simple logistical problem, but a genuine puzzle that required creative solution.
The creative solution arrived in the form of geography. Diana was scheduled to perform in Lake Tahoe, Nevada, on the evening of May 7, 1981. Lake Tahoe was approximately an hour's drive from Reno. Reno had a recording studio. Lionel could come from Los Angeles. If Diana went directly from her Lake Tahoe concert to the Reno studio, and if Lionel was already there when she arrived, they could record in the window between the end of her show and whatever obligations waited for both of them the following day. The window was small. The studio was booked for the early morning hours. It was not ideal. It was what was available. Diana Ross arrived at the studio in Reno, Nevada in the hours after her Lake Tahoe concert, still carrying the particular energy of someone who has spent the previous 2 hours performing for an audience. She was not rested. She had not had the evening that a perfectionist might have preferred to have before a significant recording session. Lionel was there, having come from Los Angeles, also not fully rested, also not in the condition that either of them might have chosen if condition had been theirs to choose. They looked at each other across the space of the recording studio with the specific mutual assessment of two professional musicians who are about to do something they have not had adequate time to prepare for and are relying on accumulated competence to carry them through. The session began at 3:30 in the morning. What happened in the next 90 minutes was not what the circumstances suggested it should be. The circumstances suggested exhaustion and tension and the particular creative friction of two people with different working styles trying to produce something under conditions of inadequate preparation. Diana was a perfectionist. Lionel was not always on time. Neither of them had slept enough. The studio was in Reno, Nevada, which was not anyone's first choice of recording environment, at 3:30 in the morning, which was not anyone's first choice of recording hour. Every external variable pointed toward difficulty. But the voices knew something the external variables did not. Diana Ross's soprano, the specific instrument she had been developing since she was a teenager in Detroit, the voice that had been on 12 #1 singles with the Supremes and had been singing to packed rooms for 20 years, found Lionel's melody and inhabited it with the complete ownership of a voice that knows immediately when it has found its territory. Lionel's tenor, warm and grounded, the voice of someone who has spent a decade learning how to communicate directly with the person listening, wrapped around Diana's and created something that neither voice could have produced alone. The specific sound of two people who are not performing love, but expressing it, who are not trying to sound romantic, but simply sounding true.
By 5 o'clock in the morning, they had Endless Love on tape. Lionel called it a disaster. He meant the process, the scrambled logistics, the early morning session, the fact that he had never written a duet before and had been given 3 weeks' notice that he was going to be doing one with Diana Ross. He meant the conditions under which the song had been recorded, which were about as far from ideal as conditions can be while still producing a finished recording. He meant everything about how it had come together, which was chaotically and under pressure and without the deliberate preparation that a song of this significance arguably deserved. He did not mean the song. The song was not a disaster. The song was, as Billboard would eventually determine after 4 decades of evidence, the greatest duet ever recorded. It spent 9 weeks at the top of the Hot 100, longer than any Motown single before it. It topped the R&B chart and the adult contemporary chart simultaneously, a combination that only this song has ever accomplished for 3 consecutive weeks. It sold 3 million copies. It was nominated for an Oscar and a Golden Globe. It became the biggest hit of Diana Ross's career and the foundation on which Lionel Richie's solo career would be built. Diana Ross performed at the 1982 Academy Awards with Lionel, the song's nomination giving both of them the specific visibility of a global television audience, watching them deliver something they had recorded in a Reno studio at 3:30 in the morning the previous year. It was Ross's last major hit for Motown, a farewell to the label that had made her famous, delivered in the form of one of that label's biggest commercial achievements. It was Lionel's first major step outside the Commodores, a demonstration that the songwriter who had produced 3 Times a Lady and Lady was ready to step fully into the spotlight on his own terms. The thing about great songs is that they do not reveal the conditions of their creation. Endless Love does not sound like a 3:30 in the morning session between 2 half-asleep musicians in a Reno studio that had been booked because there was no other option. It sounds like the most carefully considered expression of romantic devotion that 2 of the greatest voices of their generation could have produced. It sounds inevitable, the way all the best songs sound inevitable, as though they existed before they were written and the songwriter simply discovered them rather than made them. The chaos and the exhaustion and the mismatch of working styles and the 3 weeks' notice and the Nevada geography are nowhere in the sound. Only the love is there, and the love sounds endless. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Share this with someone who has produced their best work under the worst possible conditions, because sometimes the greatest things in history happen not despite the chaos, but inside it. Leave a comment below. Have you ever created something extraordinary when everything around you was going wrong? And don't forget to ring the notification bell for more stories about the moments behind the music, the 3:30 a.m. sessions, and the disasters that became masterpieces.